Hello and welcome to The Point World Affairs. I'm Cha Sang-mi. The third Inter-Korean Summit of the year will take place over 3 days in the North Korean capital of Pyongyang, starting on September 18th. The regional powers will be keeping close tabs on the result of this meeting, as denuclearization talks have reached an impasse in recent months. In today's special edition of The Point World Affairs, we will be talking to experts on the six-party talks hailing from each of the member states. One of them is with us today, Dr. Go Myong-hyun, Research Fellow at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Thank you for joining us today.
No, thanks for having me.
Before we begin, let's have a look at the statements that were announced by the South Korean envoys who returned from their trip to the north.
President Moon Jae-in is set to visit Pyongyang on September 18th for a 3-day inter-Korean summit with his North Korean counterpart Kim Jong-un. The director of the National Security Office, Chung Eui-yong, who led a group of South Korean envoys to meet with Kim, came back with a set of messages from Pyongyang, which includes an agreement to open a joint liaison office at the Kaesong Industrial Complex. He also added that the North Korean leader expressed a firm will to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula.
김정은 위원장은 한반도의 완전한 비핵화에 대한 본인의 확고한 의지를 재확인하고 이를 위해 남북 간에는 물론 미국과도 긴밀히 협력해 나가겠다는 의사를 표명하였습니다.
According to Chung, Kim Jong-un expressed frustration at the international community for questioning his intentions to denuclearize. This is all the more reason why many are anticipating what offer Kim will make in the upcoming summit between the two Koreas and possibly with the U.S. in the future. Neighboring countries are also carefully following the changes revolving around the Korean Peninsula. In particular, the countries of the six-party talks formed to resolve the North Korean nuclear issue are meticulously evaluating how the talks on denuclearization would eventually affect the security situation of their own respective countries. On this week's The Point World Affairs, we connect with experts from the U.S., China, Russia, and Japan to understand each country's position and what they hope to gain from the September Inter-Korean Summit.
Let's see how significant is the Inter-Korean Summit for the denuclearization talks.
The timing of the summit is very important because the denuclearization talk between the United States and North Korea, as you said, it came to an impasse and it doesn't seem to be able to get traction right now. So the timing is perfect for that reason. And I think President Moon is going to take to Pyongyang the message that if North Korea commits to denuclearization, then South Korea will really work hard to try to come to, sign the declaration to end the war within this year, which is something that North Korea has been seeking to achieve. So I think this is a very momentous, event. It's going to really convey a strong message to the domestic South Korean public, to the United States, that the inter-Korean dialogue is actually taking root.
Right, you just mentioned about the intentions of the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, but one of them is definitely he reaffirmed that he's fully going to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. So what do you think about his intentions?
I think the reaffirmation of this fact it's actually a message for President Trump to proceed with the second step of the agreement that both of them reached back in Singapore, which is for the United States to proceed with providing security guarantees, the first step of which will be the signing of the declaration of the end of the war.
I see. So you're saying that even though Kim Jong-un has repeatedly said that he will denuclearize, we don't know how much range this will be and exactly which area he's really going to commit to the denuclearization, whether it is just North Korea or the entire Korean Peninsula.
So we have to understand that denuclearization has several different dimensions here. So there's a political dimension because North Korea has developed nuclear weapons to ensure the survival of the country and the regime. And there's also a technical dimension of denuclearization, which entails essentially figuring out what kind of nuclear materials are there, what kind of nuclear infrastructure North Koreans have, and also what kind of weapons they have developed. So this is a technical part of denuclearization. I think the process we have seen so far, the negotiations between South Korea and North Korea, and the negotiation between North Korea and the United States, most of the negotiations and talks are focused on the political part of denuclearization, essentially the part in which North Korea is seeking security guarantees in exchange for giving up nuclear weapons. So that's the stage that we are at right now. And then I think Kim Jong-un is reminding the audience in South Korea and the United States that we are still at the political stage of the denuclearization. So there's no point in talking about, for instance, talking about the nuclear list, quote unquote, which is essentially a disclosure on the part of North Korea on the technical part of denuclearization. So I think that's the stage that we are at, and then I think North Korea keep reminding us that's the case, and there's no point in talking about the details for now.
I see. So let's hear more about what the foreign experts think about this Inter-Korean summit then.
Sure, great.
Let's now connect to experts from the U.S., China, Russia, and Japan, all members of the six-party talks. We have Mr. David Maxwell, Senior Fellow at Foundation for Defense of Democracies from Washington, D.C., Dr. Tong Zhao, a Fellow at the Carnegie-Tsinghua Center for Global Policy from Beijing, Ambassador Georgy Toloraya from the Russkiy Mir Foundation in Russia, and Professor Sachio Nakato from Ritsumeikan University in Kyoto. Welcome, all of you. Now, this question is open for all. What significance does this Inter-Korean summit hold for each of your countries, and what are your expectations?
I think September is going to be the month of Korean diplomacy. And so the summit between President Moon and Kim Jong-un is very significant from an alliance perspective. I think that based on what we have heard in the media, that they may be laying the groundwork for a declaration of the end of the Korean Civil War, which is, of course, very, very important. The friction, though, between the alliance is that North Korea has a different timeline than the United States. They want a declaration of the end of the Korean Civil War first, end of sanctions, denuclearization of the South, which means end of the alliance, end of U.S. forces on the Korean Peninsula, and end of the nuclear umbrella over Korea and Japan. And then they will talk about dismantlement of North Korea's nuclear program. The United States, on the other hand, wants dismantlement, or at least substantive moves towards dismantlement before a declaration of the end of the war and sanctions are relieved. And so that is the real friction point. And of course, South Korea and the United States need to be completely in synchronization with their policies and strategies in order to ensure success. And so if South Korea moves out ahead with a declaration first, without the support of the United States, that's going to bring friction to the alliance.
Now, Dr. Zhao, what do you think?
I think China wants to see a better inter-Korean relationship. First of all, that will help reduce the chance of another military conflict over the Korean Peninsula. And also, China has a long-term interest in regional economic integration in Northeast Asia. If South Korea is able to forge a closer economic relationship with North Korea, that will also make it easier for China to enhance its economic and trading cooperation with North Korea. In the long run, I think China has this belief that the only way to fundamentally transform the North Korean society, to fundamentally address North Korea's paranoia, is to gradually open up North Korea economically, to build better and stronger economic and trading relationship between North Korea and the outside world. So promoting economic cooperation and engagement with North Korea, I think is a long-term strategy for Beijing. So Beijing wants to see all those things happen.
Thank you. That has been Dr. Zhao from Beijing. And now to Georgy Toloraya, who is the ambassador and a chair of project analysis Russkiy Mir Foundation in Russia.
Well, Russia has always supported the strategy of sorting out, of deciding all the problems on Korean Peninsula by dialogue and diplomatic ways. So it's extremely important that two Koreas should have dialogue and cooperation. And as long ago as during Kim Dae-jun's administration, Go Myong-hyun administration, we strongly supported the inter-Korean dialogue. And we actually participated by suggested trilateral projects in this dialogue. So we are very much relieved that after the end of the presidency of Park Geun-hye, the new government, Moon Jae-in government, is very positive, both in relations with North Korea and also with relation to Russia. And we are prepared to do all we can to facilitate the dialogue and will support the cooperation in every form possible.
Thank you, Ambassador Toloraya from Moscow. And now we move to Japan. Sachio Nakato, Professor of International Studies at Ritsumeikan University.
Well, if that happens, it is very significant, not only for both Koreas and U.S.-North Korean relations, but also for Japan as well. Because if South Korea and North Korea could promote a dialogue over the denuclearization issue between the United States and North Korea, that has a positive impact on Japan, because that helps Japan and North Korea engage in dialogue regarding normalization issue. In that sense, it is very important for both leaders in both countries, both Korea, to initiate this kind of important facilitator role.
Now, let's get into more detail. David, inter-Korean relations have been the driving force behind America's relations with North Korea for the Singapore summit. Do you think this upcoming summit will help resolve the recent deadlock in the denuclearization talks?
Yes, I'm hopeful that the summit can push things forward as long as the South Korean and U.S. Policies and strategy are synchronized. We should go back to the June 30, 2017 joint statement between President Moon and President Trump. Among other things, it said three things. Denuclearization is the principle. Maximum pressure is the way that we're going to do that. And that South Korea would lead diplomatic efforts in North-South relations. And so we have seen that play out over the last year. And both President Trump and President Moon agreed to that. And we've had maximum pressure. We're focused on dismantlement of North Korea's nuclear program, and President Moon has taken the lead in trying to improve North-South relations. And so this summit can be a step forward as long as there is agreement between the U.S. and South Korea on the way forward. If South Korea acts unilaterally and the U.S. and South Korea have disagreement, it is going to cause friction in the alliance. And we should keep in mind that there can be no success for South Korea, no success for the U.S. By acting unilaterally with North Korea. It must be the ROK-U.S. alliance acting in concert on the strength of their alliance, a rock-solid foundation as the way forward that will bring success in dealing with North Korea.
Professor Nakato, Japan and the U.S. have been maintaining a good partnership when it comes to North Korean issues. But with Japan's secret meeting with the North behind the U.S. back is recently showing a dissonance with Washington. Some reports say that Japan is planning a separate summit with North Korea in November. As relations between Pyongyang and Washington grows apart, wouldn't it actually have a negative impact on Tokyo?
Well, that's a very good question. Japan has a dilemma. Japan is in a dilemma because Japan has to resolve the abduction issue as well as nuclear and missile issues. Japan needs to cooperate with the United States in order to solve nuclear and missile issues. Japan cannot solve these issues by itself. But on the other hand, the abduction issue is solely Japan's problem. So Japan has to deal with this problem by itself. Yes, as you mentioned, yes, Japan is in a dilemma, but Japan needs to both issues. In that sense, Japan needs to cooperate with the United States, but at the same time, Japan needs to deal with separate issues from the United States. So in order to promote both, in order to attain both objectives, Japan needs to cooperate with the United States and needs to communicate with the United States very well in order to solve the abduction issues as well.
Thank you, Professor. It seems like all the countries are really interconnected. So what do you think about our President Moon Jae-in? As they say, the denuclearization talks is at a deadlock, and he's trying to push for a future with North Korea. So what do you think about South Korea's position?
Well, the South Korea is not in an awkward position, in my view. I think it can take advantage of this situation, because I think South Korea, for this brief moment, has an initiative when it comes to North Korea. I think we have heard from the experts from Japan, United States, China, and Russia. And then, in essence, what they are saying is that their country, their respective countries, are waiting on the wings to see what South Korea can do with North Korea to move their own process relations with North Korea forward. So I think what they are waiting for is some sort of breakthrough when it comes to the U.S. DPRK talk, which is at an impasse right now. I think they are looking towards, looking forward to the South Korean President Moon Jae-in to somehow elicit a strong commitment on the part of Kim Jong-un that is going to totally denuclearize North Korea, and then somehow that could create a ground to open the dialogue, actually move forward with the dialogue with the United States, so that the United States can finally maybe relax some of the sanctions that are in place against North Korea, and then the United States in exchange gets the denuclearization gestures from North Korea.
So the South Korean President Moon Jae-in will definitely play a mediator role in terms of connecting North Korea with all the other countries. Well, let's hope for that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right. Now to Dr. Zhao in Beijing. With the U.S.-China relations at its worst due to the trade dispute, China seems to be more invested in its relations with Russia, both politically and militarily. How do you think this will affect denuclearization negotiations?
I think it will very much affect the denuclearization negotiation. At the geopolitical level, the U.S.-China bilateral strategic rivalry is growing very quickly. And China is very much concerned that the U.S. is now seeing China as its primary long-term adversary, and is doing everything to slow down China's growth to contain China's peaceful rise. So given this focus on U.S.-China bilateral rivalry, I think China is very much looking at the North Korean issue increasingly from the geopolitical perspective. So the priority for China becomes how to make sure in the future North Korea will have a closer relationship with China than with the United States. In other words, preventing North Korea from being absorbed into the Washington's orbit is increasingly important for China. So geostrategic consideration becomes more important at the cost of upholding non-proliferation principles. It's another way to say, I think, it will be increasingly difficult for US and China to have substantive and in-depth negotiation and cooperation to address North Korea's nuclear threat. I think this is also important for North Korea. North Korea wouldn't trust any goodwill from the United States in the form of security guarantee, but I think North Korea knows very well that China-US mutual suspicion and mutual distrust will grow and will deepen in the long-term future. So North Korea is going to make the most out of this growing distrust between Beijing and Washington. So the North Korean strategy depends on balancing between the two big powers in this region, China and the United States.
How about Russia? Ambassador Toloraya, Russia is recently stressing its cooperation with China. Is it because of concerns that Russia is being excluded from denuclearization talks? What's your thought on that?
Well, we have a sort of tacit understanding with China that China plays the first role in Korean affairs and Korean Peninsula, and we support and participate in it, while Russia is playing the first role in the Western sort of Syria or Ukraine portion with support of China. Of course, Korean issue is very important for us, but there's no contradictions between us and China on this issue, because we both support denuclearization, we both support political and diplomatic solution. We have the interest in economic cooperation. Of course, China has much more, but anyway, we also support economic cooperation, and we are not much of a competitors in economic cooperation with North Korea. Of course, it's natural that Kim Jong-un deals to China as the most important external player, apart from the USA, in solving the Korean issue. It is much better that North Korea this year started diplomatic offensive towards China, rather than not having much of relations as was the case in previous years. So Russia is actually relieved that the Chinese-North Korean cooperation is developing. And also I feel that the not so strict observance of sanctions by China, it helps North Korean economy, and thus it stabilizes the situation in North Korea, which is also in our interests.
Thank you all, four of you from Washington, D.C., Kyoto, Beijing, and Moscow for your insights today. Thank you. China, they have been saying that is one of the key players when it comes to denuclearization discussions. But there's this issue with President Xi Jinping not visiting North Korea for the September 9th event, which is the Foundation Day of North Korea. And it was an anticipated visit. So do you think, why was this canceled? And do you think this is maybe too much of a diplomatic risk that China thinks so?
Xi Jinping's visit to Pyongyang wasn't really officially announced, as it was been rumored, but then so it didn't really take place. And I think, as you have mentioned, it's exactly right. I think it was too risky for President Xi to be seen side by side with Kim Jong-un when, at this juncture, when China and the United States are they're engaged in their own confrontation over trade issues and other economic and security matters. So, I mean, I think the fear on the part of the Chinese is that the parade, North Koreans could actually put on the display some of the weapons of mass destruction weapons, such as ICBMs and other long-range missiles, and that could potentially convey a very negative message to Washington. So I think that's exactly something that President Xi was trying to avoid.
Dr. Zhao, though, he said that the distrust between China and the U.S. will grow more in the future. But since we know that all of these countries have the same intention at the end of the day about peace and prosperity on this Korean peninsula, and which will definitely connect to peace and prosperity for their countries, do you think this dispute between the two countries, two superpowers, will actually continue?
Definitely, I think it's going to continue because this strategic competition between China and the United States are taking place along in many different dimensions, not just in the Korean Peninsula, but we know that it's also taking place in East China Sea, in South China Sea, not just geographically, but economically as well. The two powers are fighting over the intellectual property issues, trade issues. So I think the list goes on and on like that. So this is like, I mean, North Korea is one of the outstanding issues that the two superpowers have at the moment. But I think, as Professor Tong has indicated, North Korea is definitely very well aware of the fact that this competition actually is creating a space for North Korea to somehow take advantage of. I think North Korea is not trying to balance China with the United States. I think North Korea is trying to exploit the schism between the two superpowers to achieve its strategic objective of becoming, I would say, a regional power player. And I think that's where they are right now. So I think in that sense, I think North Korea is a very comfortable situation, I think. And then I think they'll keep trying to use that. And what the fear is that if we don't recognize this desire on the part of North Korea to exploit the standoff between the two superpowers in this part of the world, is that North Korea might take advantage of that against South Korea as well.
What is one hope, if you have, for the Inter-Korean Summit when the leaders of South and North Korea meet? What is the one hope that you want them to achieve?
If I had a wish, I would like for Kim Jong-un to really come out with a very well-defined and well-described list of nuclear materials that North Korea possesses right now. I think that's going to really send a very positive message to Washington, and this is going to lead to a chain of events, a positive chain of events, which will actually culminate in signing a peace treaty with the North Korea, South Korea, and the United States. So that's exactly the hope I have for this summit.
Thank you very much. Let's hope it happens. Thank you for your expertise today.
My pleasure.
It seems like the third Inter-Korean summit might be a definite turning point for the stalled denuclearization talks. With related parties and the whole world closely following this historic event, we'll be sure to keep you up to date on all of the subsequent developments on the next edition of our show. That's all we have for today. Thank you for tuning in, and see you next week.